This is the In Good Time podcast with Nick Lowe and Andrew Steininger. In this episode, we compare what it means to be an artist versus a professional. We look at this question through the lens of our expertise in music, but also several other disciplines that are within the realm of artistry. We take a philosophical approach to answering this question by drawing on our own experiences, examples from pop culture, and our own education. Ultimately, we hope to provide further thought into a question that strikes at the heart of all creative endeavors.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the In Good Time podcast. Today, Andrew and I are talking about the idea of an artist versus a professional, what that kind of looks like in music, where it overlaps, where the two ideas might be separated a little bit, and then how we can bring those together. Andrew, you want to get us started? When you think about artist and professional, what kind of comes to mind?
Yeah, it's definitely one of those topics in music that can draw some controversy when you talk about what music is or what it should be. I think when we, as general people, think about what it means to be a professional, we think of someone who has a career or someone that's really good at doing one thing. So like a professional carpenter or a professional lawyer or something of that nature. Versus an artist is a little bit more vague, right? So it's more of an expressionary type of title, where sometimes artists, most people, when you hear the word artist, they think painter. But artist usually can cover a large group of people that isn't just involve visual art. It can involve many different types of art. So in terms of what I've experienced in this, the way that it bleeds into the music world is sometimes you get people that kind of follow those two different types of tracks, and they usually have two different ways of thinking. When you're following those two tracks, the professional, at least in my experience, usually is more committed to like an actual product, like here's what I have to offer, versus an artist is more interested in presenting something, right? Getting at something that's not necessarily like a product, more of a scratching at the surface of something.
Yeah, I had a similar but a little bit of a different interpretation for those two. To me, when I think about an artist, or when I'm feeling, particularly artistic, I tend to think that it is more of how I want to express an idea to an audience, and get a reaction of some sort. Whereas when I think of myself as a professional, I tend to think more of my audience first, of what is either being requested or what is going to engage an audience member in a particular way, as opposed to my artist side thinking, okay, here's what I'd like to do. How can I get an audience to respond to that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a divide between the two that some people will make, where they will assign more of a creativity value to an artist as opposed to a professional. But what's interesting is, especially when it comes to a professional musician, and obviously we'll talk more about this in depth, but it's almost like the profession of the musician is creativity, and that almost is like a paradox. Like, how do you be a consistently creative, professional? See what I mean?
Right. Well, I don't think anybody, at least, in music, and I'm sure in art and, film creating also, no one goes into the profession without first enjoying it, So I think no matter what your goal is. If you are a professional, you're doing it for the love of the craft, you know. And I think that comes forward just in different ways than maybe someone who is in it for like art for art's sake kind of things. But you know, I think, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting because you just made me think of like a craftsman, right? Some like a carpenter or like someone who makes something. And a professional, I think you're exactly right that it's tied to that idea, which makes you wonder: is that present in the artist side of it too, or is an artist not as much worried about the perfection of the craft, but more using bits of the craft to get at something bigger or outside of what the professional is looking to do?
Yeah.
So
you know, I was gonna save this for more at the end. So maybe I guess I was gonna talk about so like I was brainstorming, you know, different musicians that kind of fill the roles. But
yeah, I guess we'll get to answer those questions as we go along here. But let's just dive deeply into what is an artist.
Yeah, I said this a minute ago, but I'll say it again. When I think about an artist, the first thing that comes to mind is art for art's sake. You know, like when you think about, you know, oh, the best of the best, the most creative, we want to put it on a like this pedestal of like, oh, they're doing it just for the sake of the art. There's no ulterior motives. Money isn't a factor, and it's all about just, you know, creating that sense of expression and whatnot.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start, starting with that stereotype of kind of like the idealistic genius. You know, like that's what people think of when they think of an artist, where they lock themselves away for extended periods of time and they're left alone with their thoughts, and they're like, you know, like sweat, you know, they're in like a t-shirt and they're sweating, or you know, and playing something, or
and they're
painting
chopping their
something.
ears off.
Right. And then the things that they're doing, or the ideas that they're able to convey, are exclusively theirs because of some factor that they have, some connection to expressivity that they have that only the artist has.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a, well, it's definitely a false perception that, you know, it like art, you know, has to be like just what you're feeling and what you're trying to get the audience to feel and whatnot. Because if you think about like particularly in filmmaking, you've got all of these creative artistic decisions that have to work together in order to make the film work. You know, with an actor has to be particularly artistic in the way that they're delivering their lines, but it falls flat if the directing, you know, the way that the lens moves or the camera moves, it doesn't capture that emotion. And then those two things fail if the score that's going underneath doesn't work. Like, it's like, have you ever seen those short YouTube videos where it's like, I put SpongeBob music over, you know, like a car chase or something like that, and you see, and it's like the high speed, you know, police pursuit, but with SpongeBob music, it's a completely a different, you know, experience.
Or like when they put yakety sax over anything that's like people running around.
Right. Yeah. You know, and it turns it into a totally different thing. So I think that true, like, artistic expression and a true artist is someone that can't operate in a vacuum necessarily. Like their influences are just as important as their end product.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think that will be a good lens for us to look at the artist through. So like when people think of the artist, they think of kind of unbridled expression, right? It's this person who just is able to express something through a medium. So I guess let's take a second. We'll talk about like what it means to express something and why someone would want to express something, and who can express things like that. So I think the expression for me, at least, is the general sense of expression for me. People are expressing things all the time. You know, the way you choose to dress is an expression of either something learned or something that you internally feel, or it could be any number of things. But when it comes to an artist, they're taking a specific discipline, a specific skill set, and that, you know, they don't necessarily have to be incredibly skilled at that skill set. But often the most memorable artists are the most incredibly skilled. But they're using a particular skill set to try to express a feeling or an idea, or sometimes, in the case of music, there's many composers that have created, I would say, art based off of images, or based off of other sounds, or, you know, any other number of sensory inputs that they've gotten.
Yeah, and I think that those emotions, you know, when you're looking at it from the artistic perspective solely, it's pretty easy to come to the conclusion that oftentimes it doesn't have to be a positive response that the artist is looking to capture from an audience, or that I said that right, that the artist is trying to capture from the audience doesn't necessarily have to be positive. Sometimes the goal can be shock or disgust or something, you know, that's like the goal of the work, you know. I think of, you know, like a John Cage, you know, 433. It probably took him 30 seconds to come up with that concept, but I'm sure his goal was not, oh, I want this to be the most beautiful piece of silence of all time. You know, his goal is to make the audience, you know, interpret that silence in a specific way, and probably be a little confused, uncomfortable. But that is where Cage saw his art and his expression.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I know that it's been interpreted, that piece has been interpreted and discussed many times over. And when we talked about it when we were in school, there was discussion on whether the piece, the actual, like, aural experience of the piece, whether it's silence or whether it's an improvisatory piece, that the piece itself is the noise that happens during the performance, you know, audience movement, or things that go on and muffled in a distance, or any of those things. It's interesting because in a piece of, and I don't necessarily know if I would consider that art personally. I think that I have a different standard for what I would call art, but regardless, if I were to call that art, it begs the question of what is Cage trying to express there? Was he getting that expression thinking about the audience first, or is he expressing something in trying to express something in him, irrespective of the audience? Like, he's trying to get the audience to understand what he's feeling versus getting an expression from the audience. You see what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's a tricky point as an audience member, because it's almost like the more you know about something, the less you know about something. Yeah, the average consumer on the street could hear that and have a, like, you know, they can just make a judgment. They liked it, they didn't like it. Okay, great. When you're more involved in a particular field, it's almost like you can't necessarily talk about it unless you've kind of done your homework on it. Like, it's a little harder to just give snap judgments without kind of thinking,
right,
okay, well, what was it that they were trying to get at with this? Where was their head at? You know, and I think we're more in tune with that as musicians because of kind of the triangle of the production, I guess, the composer, the audience, the performer. As a musician, you're kind of always in some way in that triangle.
And I think that's where the skill set comes in, because you learn to interpret things through things that you know. So if you have a certain skill set that is directly connected to the area of something you're trying to interpret, you're going to have a little bit of a filter to perceive those things through. Like, for example, you and I are able to look at a piece of music in great depth and through many different lenses that are all pertaining to the music world. We've got music theory, we've got conducting, we've got, all different types of things that we can analyze a piece through, that the average person is just going to listen to something almost as a whole. But I think there's something I want to try and get at a little bit deeper in that. So, like, I know we've all got the image I pictured I painted of an artist earlier, where they're desperately trying to express something that they feel. I think that is the common idea of what an artist is. Would you agree? So, like,
Yeah.
they have an internal state or something that happened or something that they perceived that they are trying to express in their own form through music, painting, whatever.
Right. Well, that brings to mind that the common expression is the starving artist. No one pictures the well-fed, properly groomed artist. It's always like the starving artist, where the what they're trying to say is the most important thing to them, and they'll chase after that no matter how it perceives. I think is the common image that is generally thought of.
That is interesting, because it's when people start off with something unique, and you generally associate artists with uniqueness, right? They're doing something that's kind of like special or creative or completely new, and oftentimes it isn't necessarily completely new, but that's a side note. But as they get more prominent or popular, sometimes, to me, it seems like they lose that title of artist. And it's funny, because we call in pop culture, we call a lot of pop singers artists, right? That's what they're not composers, they're the artist. Right. And what's really interesting is oftentimes the things that a pop artist does today is nothing what a traditional stereotypical artist would do in their creation or expression of an idea through music or paint or whatever, right? The artists of today, the label we give to artists of today, they're basically what I would consider professionals, where they're given something and they have to produce something using their skill set.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. It's more like, is that more of them being a professional, or almost like a vessel through which the song is given to the public,
right?
I guess, though, the artistry comes then from the vocalists, if we're looking at a vocalist as opposed to like a guitar player or something, through their interpretation of it. And it's kind of like, at that point, it's almost like what we as teachers do in our classroom, because what the students are performing, 9 times out of 10 is not something that they've written themselves. It's a piece of music that we've given them that has been written, and
we haven't written ourselves either.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So we don't have necessarily I know that at this measure, this is the exact feeling. We can study up and do our research on it. But at the end of the day, it is that kind of interpretation. But then for the students, they are the kind of, it's their expression that is the artistry in the piece. So yeah, it's a little bit different, but you know, I think that concept of who is the artist, I guess, is a good question. You know?
Yeah, and this is actually a good segue into the last bit of this artist before we jump into talks about being a professional. The idea, and this is something that I don't know that I ran across until I was a little bit older in school, but this idea that everybody is an artist sort of thing, where it's linked to the idea that like everybody's unique and everyone's special, right? That the phrase that everyone's heard before. Everybody has something to express, therefore everybody has an artist in them. It's interesting because as a teacher, as someone who's looking to develop students, that's a topic and an idea that you really want to believe in. You know, you really want to believe that every student's going to have this spark in them, and they're going to come up with something unique, and then they're just going to follow that passion and take it to wherever they're going to take it to. But I'm not necessarily convinced that that's always the case. And I'm not saying that not everybody. I'm not saying that everybody doesn't have something to offer, because everybody does have something to offer. But I don't know if we can go around saying that everybody is an artist. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, there are lots of people who, you know, particularly, you know, being creative in the traditional sense is quite challenging. You know, like a couple people are coming to mind, and I have when I think about those people, it's like they are very talented in the fields in which they excel, but you know, in the traditional sense of expressing themselves, they can really struggle, whether it comes to just even verbally, you know, saying exactly how they might feel in a situation might be challenging for them. And yet they still feel that way. So I think if we say everyone is an artist, it's I think is a little challenging maybe for those people who tend to struggle in that area. And there's nothing wrong with struggling to do those types of things. You know, it's a different skill set.
Yeah, I think the issue that I have with that phrase is that whenever we think of something that's kind of artful, there's almost always an association of some type of skill or mastery associated with it. So, and I'm thinking specifically of like savant or like prodigy level people who sometimes when you ask them how they did something or what they were thinking when they did something, they don't have an answer. You know? And some of those people produce some of the most artful or considered some of the most artful pieces of works out there.
Yeah, and it just comes so naturally to some people, whereas others, you know, they spend their entire life working up to their masterpiece, you know, whatever level the masterpiece is.
And I guess it isn't to say that there isn't a level of artfulness in, you know, different projects. You know, someone who has worked their whole life and maybe not necessarily been the most talented or the most well respected throughout their endeavors, but certainly there is a level of artistry that goes into really any project. But to give someone that label of artist, or to call something a work of art, you almost have to have this next level, like application of skill or application of concept, or, you know, like originality attached to it. And it's really funny because sometimes, like, if you have a discussion with someone about what is art or is that a piece of art, it's almost like an intuitive thing. Like people just get this feeling like, nah, that's not really art though. You know, like if you, the best example of this is when you go to, like music is a good example, but I think maybe even a better example is I'm gonna forget the name, but a place where they have paintings.
Like an art gallery.
Yes, an art gallery. Thank you. um, so like depending on the era of art that you're looking at, some people just have this intuitive, whether it's cultural or whatever it is, something that in them where they just have an intuitive reaction to say, "Wow, that's a piece of art," or "That's not a piece of art. That's just goofy," you know?
Yeah, it's almost as if not all art is valuable, but all art can be valued.
Yeah.
I guess where
Yeah.
to me, a piece of paper that a student maybe has drawn for me and it looks like okay, a 10-year-old drew this, isn't valuable to someone who doesn't know the kid. But to me, if they made it just as I wanted to do this for you, that has value to me. And I guess it would be the same way at a public gallery or a public concert, where you hear a piece of music or you see a piece of art and you go, that doesn't really count. But to someone else who they do click with it, or they do see that value, it totally turns it on its head.
Yeah, I think we're getting close to making the distinction here. I think this is a good way to segue into what is a professional, because it seems like we're scratching at this idea of how is someone expressive through the application of their skills, and what does that end up producing? Whether that was intentional, that they wanted to produce it for the sake of producing it, or they're producing it because of an expressive desire. So as a professional, like what are we getting at? What's a professional?
Like I said earlier, I think that no one goes into a profession without a love of the craft. And I do think that if we have like the stereotypical image of the starving artist on one hand, I think how we tend to picture a professional is like realistic expectations and the intent to deliver, I guess, is how I would kind of picture a standard professional, whereas an artist might, like for the sake of their creation, they might have X, Y, and Z in place, and they do it, and then it never gets performed. Whereas, perhaps a professional, kind of, it, to me, lives within the realm of, okay, I know that this, and this have to be in place in order for my work to be displayed or performed or whatnot. Like, for example, someone like a composer who might, work on this huge orchestral work, and it's everything that they've worked for and accomplished. Whereas a professional could, they could do that, but they might be the person who uses their talents of composing to specifically write educational music, where it's not necessarily something monumental and mind-blowing, but it's an application of their skill in a manner in which the kind of realistic parameters of how the world works is in place.
Yeah, I think a useful way of looking at this will be we're seeing how a professional orients themselves towards time. Right? So when I think of a professional, I think of someone who is what you could call on brand, right? They have their own set of skills or their own set of qualities that they're able to market to a specific area or a specific, part of the market that they think they will be beneficial to, or will bring them some type of value. And when I think of their relationship to time, often a professional is not willing to put in, and this is a generalization, of course, but a professional is less likely to put in extra time for the sake of, like, just as like a what's the word, a favor, right? Their time is valuable, and so if they're coming in to do something, they're coming in to do a specific thing, not necessarily stay around to figure out the whole process of something.
Yeah, and in some cases, that's exactly what you want or need as the person who is like hiring the professional. You know, in the case of, you know, a wedding ceremony, you hire the group for X amount of time, and you might not know them, so you don't, like, okay, yeah, after a certain point, it's I do not need you here. You may go, you know, and it'd almost be weird if they wanted to really go the, you know, and invest and play music, and you're like, okay, dude, this is the reception. Everybody's kind of dancing. You're playing violin. So,
and that's really interesting because it might be a really good example of what it means to be a professional in music, because like wedding type performances or lounge type performances or you know, happy hour type performances, there's not a whole lot of people out there, I don't think, that are really consciously focused on making the best cocktail hour performance possible. You know what I mean? There's like they're not an active focused on perfecting the art or the craft of lounge playing. You know what I mean? It's it's definitely a skill set. There's a skill set out there. But in terms of like exploring the bounds of cocktail lounge playing, I don't think that really exists. But it's a skill set that a professional brings to a situation for a certain amount of time, and then after that they just leave it. You know, it's that product is done. They're finished with it and they're on to the next thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. As I was kind of breaking these down, you know, it occurred to me that when you look at just one side of it on its own, I think it's really easy to view it in a very negative context. You know, like
specifically the professional side.
Oh, I both sides together.
Okay.
I think on their own, you know, because on their own, without any artistry, it's easy to kind of imagine a professional as, you know, oh, I'm only taking this gig, you know, because I can't do something else, or I'm only, you know, I will only put in an hour and a half and then I'm done. And on the other side, with the artist, it's easy to imagine, you know, someone with just, you know, their fantasy of what they want, but no sense of groundedness or realism in which it could actually occur. So I think it kind of made it clear to me that in music, at least, these two things are so intertwined and important to each other, and the skill sets play off of each other in order to create the best musicians.
Yeah, I think something that's gonna help us both with this is just looking at it actually linguistically. The word professional is almost always used to describe something else, right? So like you can call someone a professional, but usually there's some context to figure out what exactly you're talking about that happens before that. So if I were to add the context into that sentence, I would say you are a professional musician, right? So there's like what is a musician is there, but then there's a qualifier on that, a professional musician. So there's a certain set of qualities that is associated with being a professional that then gets imposed onto what it means to be a musician, or that those qualities enhance what it means to be a musician. You see what I mean?
Yeah. So then would the opposite of professional be amateur, or would you see that as something else?
Yeah, I think that we can make that connection. To me, professional is like almost associated with the word expert.
Sure.
And there are probably some distinctions to be made there. But I think that's fair to say that there's an increasing scale of quality that where professional is close or near to the top of that scale of quality. Because when you hire a professional, you're almost expecting a certain quality or a high quality of whatever you're looking to do. And what's interesting about the music world and the art world in general is when you say professional musician, you're looking for a high quality of artistry in certain situations. Now that's not always true necessarily, like for example the wedding band. Although I would make an argument for certain levels of artistry in a wedding band entertainment type situation. But this is where I think we're gonna start to see the combination of these two here, where it's like we have a unique position where when someone says, okay, I'm a professional carpenter. When someone says professional carpenter, usually they're not thinking of, wow, that guy's really creative with the way that he builds beds. I mean, maybe you are, but I think when you start talking like that, you actually get into the realm of artistry. Like if someone starts commenting on how creative that individual was with their profession, that's when you start getting the artist conversation happening there. Versus like, I got a professional bricklayer and they did my patio or whatever. You know, you like, okay, I want the patio done. And then they did it, and it was efficient, and it was good, and it was quality, and everyone's happy. But you're not sitting there staring at the bricks like, my God, this is the best brick patio I've seen in my whole life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's almost like the consistency is the focus of a professional is kind of what you're getting at. Like, you know, if you want a professional bricklayer, you want somebody who is very consistent. They understand the way that the pieces of brick fit together and what they need to do with the whatever it is that goes in between the bricks to keep them in place. I don't even know. Clearly, I'm not a bricklaying professional, but you want that consistency. And I think you can say the same about music too. If you're looking for we could go to a professional lounge singer, or someone whose profession is playing at bars. You don't want someone who is so inconsistent that or they perform overly creatively in a way that the patrons of your bar don't like it. The patrons of the bar, if it's if they're used to hearing country music, they just want some country music. They want the consistency of, familiar songs that they can enjoy and sing along with and, have that experience. Whereas on the other side of that, the consistency in the realm of artistry can almost be hindering. You think about like Mozart, and he did the same thing for so long that the audiences at the time started to just kind of get bored of it, even though it was still great music. His overly consistent design by the end of his career was almost more of a hindrance to him than it was.
Right. So the idea of the artist is someone that we almost expect to constantly being surprising us or developing something new, something we haven't heard before, something that takes us away from the consistency that we cling to on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree with that.
There was one story while I was doing transportation for the Elmhurst College when we were there, Elmhurst College, now Elmhurst University Jazz Fest. I was sitting in the president's dining room with the guests, one of the big bands, and talking to some of the artists there. I call them artists, just waiting to take some of them home, or just having, enjoying themselves, and me having a good conversation. And there was this, I believe he was a trombone player. I don't remember his name. He was an older gentleman, most likely in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. So, he if there could be a definition of a professional musician, it would probably be him. And guys like him that play in bands like that, where they get called all over the world or all over the country, it doesn't matter, to go play and do a specific role in a musical setting. And what was interesting was when I got to talking to him about like kind of his lifestyle, or we got specifically talking about teaching, because I'm a music educator, and I was studying music education at the time. He was very adamant about how he doesn't really want to teach, or didn't really want to teach, and he had students come up to him and talk about, hey, can I get lessons from you? Hey, could I ask you a few questions about playing and how you got on Broadway and all that stuff. And he said he's done it a couple times, but for whatever reason he just wasn't interested in like talking to people about his profession necessarily, or like in a teaching capacity. And I'm not making the argument that teachers are artists necessarily, but to me, a commitment to like the commitment to learning and the commitment to developing the broader concepts of something is deeply linked to being an artist, because an artist is deeply in tuned to those concepts. Otherwise, they wouldn't know what to break, what to go outside of to make something artistic. So it was interesting, because all this gentleman really wanted to do was he wanted to go play. He just wanted to do his job, and he wanted to do it really well. And he wanted to play with other people who felt the same as him, who just wanted to play good and play.
Yeah. And I mean, when we all, I'm sure, have, or we can recall experiences where we've been with other musicians of a high caliber, and the music is good, and there's nothing like that experience.
Oh yeah.
So for someone in his situation, especially if he's been doing it for so many years, it makes total sense that he's completely in love with his profession and what he is able to do and bring to the table for that band.
So let's see if we can draw these two things together. So for let's just say we are a young musician, maybe in high school, maybe in college, but we're really, really interested in the music world, whether it's composing, performing, teaching, whatever. When we think about, and I know I've thought about this before when I was younger, the role of being like an active professional versus an artist, and whether or not we should be thinking about any of those at all.
Yeah, for a student of music, when you first pick up that instrument, everything that you do is really just artistic. Because like if we earlier defined professional as high level of excellence, there's no way that a beginner could be held to that standard. So, something that could be like professional-ish in their learning could be the like exercises that they play for class and the new concepts that they're learning. But realistically, a young kid who picks up that trumpet for the first time is doing it just because they like playing. They want to be able to play what they hear on on TV or in a movie theater. And I think as you get older, both sides of that are much more refined. So for you were saying, maybe a high school student, I think by the time you get to high school, you can have a better idea of what you're able to do on your instrument and how you can be expressive. They're starting to be more artistic, and then the professional development or development toward the professional sense is through the concert pieces that they might be playing, because like we were just saying a few minutes ago, if we're defining professional as high level, but then also they just love for the craft where they just want to go and they just want to play with the band and make it as great as they can. Someone in high school can do the same thing. It's, I think, necessary for them to be offered the opportunities in order to do that, though.
Yeah. I think for me, just reflecting back on my time in college and late high school, thinking about like things that you had to do to be prepared to play or things that you had to do to be prepared for auditions. It was this really unique blend of both. Because as I go through my teaching career right now, I'm finding that when I think more artistically, right, thinking about creative solutions or thinking about the music as it is on a piece, as it hits you emotionally or as it impacts an audience, I'm able to utilize my professional skills to achieve an artistic goal now. Versus when you're in school, sometimes it seems like you're only focused on developing those skills and you never quite get that connection to actually why you're developing those skills in the first place. So as you kind of go through the process of becoming, whether you're choosing to become a professional at something, which I think everybody should try to at least aim to be professional in something. I think it's important to keep in mind that we are in a creative field. And I would even go so far to say that everybody should involve some type of creativity in the work that they do as a professional. But that's a separate discussion. Always keep in mind that the skills we develop are purpose-built to get at artistry, to produce artistry in something, right? So like, for example, a Broadway musician, although they might consider just their profession or they're just doing their job and doing their job well, a performance of Wicked on Broadway is deeply artful, especially if you're someone who doesn't have a whole lot of music experience and is just taking all of that information in, the visual, the aural, the sensory, all of that stuff. There's definitely art happening there. So again, it might not necessarily be at the level of the individual. And as you're in school, sometimes it can just feel like I'm learning something because I have to learn something. But keeping in mind that all of those pieces eventually can come together if you keep at it long enough to suit you to achieve an artistic goal.
Yeah, and I think that, I don't think that Broadway or the CSO is the only place where those things can happen. I've heard many high school bands that just sound phenomenal, and I'm sure that those students are kind of experiencing that that level of, okay, I've done my preparation, I'm bringing this to the table, I'm being expressive in this, and it really does kind of bring it all together. I think that as teachers, we kind of need to show students how to do both sides of this, because I don't know if it's the same for you, but for me, it's taken me until, the last couple years to really understand how to be expressive on my trumpet. Because I that was something that didn't really occur to me, and I knew that the music was cool and I wanted to do the best performance of the music that I could, but really the individual detail of phrasing and vibrato and really kind of painting a story through what you're playing is something that I think needs to be taught. So when in my teacher role, I try to, or I see it as making artistic decisions through a professional lens. So the repertoire that we select is obviously, artistic. You don't want to pick something that just stinks, because that's not going to be fun. But also, as the teacher, you are responsible for decisions in blend and balance and phrasing. With a middle school ensemble, you can get them, okay, everybody knows notes, rhythms, their intonation's fine, great. But then, okay, a lot of times the French horn and the alto sax are playing the same thing. As the teacher, it's your job to tell them, okay, in this passage, we want to hear the French horn supported by the alto sax. So that's how you are bringing that artistry forward in the music, but also in the students, so that they know what to listen for and how to interact. But then the professional lens of a teacher is the product really is a performance, and it's a performance for parents, and for students, the product is their own improvement. And so you need to design different lessons and concerts in mind to challenge the students so that they can, have the opportunity to evoke and move to the next level of artistry, but in a way that's going to be enjoyable for them and enjoyable for the community. And I think that's the professional part of it, is that I think it would be very risky to program 433 for a band concert where you might be able to talk all the artistry in the world about it. No one's going to want to play it at a high school concert. And I'm, certainly none of the parents are going to either. So that's kind of their job, is to make those artistic decisions through the lens of the professional attitude.
Yeah, I think all of that was very well said. I couldn't agree more. There's definitely, it's really interesting now that listening to you talk about things that have gone on in my head. Teaching is such a unique combination, especially teaching music. I know I've done this many times where I kind of singled out music teaching as kind of special, but I truly believe that it is. We have this weird job of both being a professional teacher, where we are expected to produce some type of a product, right? As a professional, we're supposed to be able to do some type of task, but we're also supposed to foster an artistic development in our students. And even if a student is not going to be a professional musician or an artist or whatever, it's our job to develop that side of them. And the really crazy part is, and I completely agree that with you, that just in the last year starting to teach, my playing has changed because I'm now thinking about how I want my students to do that. So now I have to be accountable to be able to do that, just so that I know what the heck I'm talking about. But there's this really unique balancing act going on where we're trying to develop ourselves as professionals, where we're trying to be efficient, we're trying to be clear, we're trying to develop something that's streamlined, right? That we can kind of take students through A, B, C, and D, and they can get to a goal. But at the same time, we're still playing with this creativity, this kind of unpredictable element that we want students to engage with, like, all the time. We don't just want them to be a robotic player who just kind of does what they're told. There are ensembles that exist like that, but I think both you and I agree that that's not the way that we want our students to come up in music.
Yeah, exactly. As you were talking about that, it brought to mind that this idea of, the balance of the artistry from the students and the professional, like we want them to treat it like professional, and then we're doing the same thing in modeling. It happens throughout the entire field of music. Composers are thinking about these things as they're writing. The publishers are thinking through these things as they're figuring out how they want their company to be represented with what they're publishing. Teachers are doing it, performers are doing it, the sound technicians are doing it as well, as they're thinking, okay, what kind of sound do we want? Who needs to be brought out a little bit, and how can I do my best job in order to do that? So, really, music is such a perfect blend of these two different sides of a coin.
Yeah, I think this is a good place to give our final thoughts about the artist versus professional discussion. I guess I'll start. So for me, we intentionally put these things as verses just to have an interesting discussion. But I think as in many cases, we have kind of shown that these two play with each other in order to create an individual person that can take on aspects of both, one or both. And what's really even interesting is you can go through phases too. Professionals can choose not to be professional anymore. They can retire and become an artist, or an artist can be making stuff and become mainstream and choose to become more professional. And it kind of goes both ways. But like we've mentioned, in terms of the way that how this can impact just and your average music student, for me, it's always thinking about what can I do, or what can I study, or what can I think about that's going to have the biggest impact on everything else that I do, right? So as an artist, how is this going to help inform my profession? Or as a professional, how is this going to help serve the art? And if you always kind of have the other serving, each one serving each other, I think there's a great balance that can be struck there.
Yeah, and I think that it's possible to have your music be, or your impact be wildly possible, regardless of how far into one or the other you are. Like, for example, we think about Bach, and he was a professional first and an artist second, where he wasn't even very popular of his time because he was focused on his profession, and yet his music is so like foundational to the entirety of Western civilization. Kind of in the middle, not fully professional, not fully artist. I think about Shostakovich, where outwardly he was very professional, writing exactly how the government was having him write, and inwardly he was very artistic in the choices that he made, so that looking back on his music, you can interpret it as, okay, yeah, he really had some ideas that he wanted to get through. And then on the other extreme, you've got Beethoven, who's pretty much as close to fully an artist as you can get. Like, he didn't even have any patrons. He just, or like, at that level, it was all just like, yeah, come to my concerts, I'm really good. So wherever you line on the artist to professional, I think it's possible for your music to be lasting and impactful, as long as it's, I guess that's a different discussion. So Or we should just say, oh, if you want to know what makes it last, go watch our Test of Time podcast.
Yeah, right.
We already talked for an hour about
shameless plug.
Right. Any other, final thoughts here?
I think that about wraps it up for me. This was a good discussion. I'm glad we got to have it.
Yeah, it's something that you and I have been talking about for a long time, and
Sitting around the table at breakfast.
Oh, yeah.
Monday morning philosophy.
I did have, after we had our episode where you talked about your breakfast, I did have somebody text me and go, okay, I gotta know what is in his breakfast. So it's famous now.
Well, I'll invite him over. I'll cook breakfast for everybody.
There we go.
I can do it with my eyes closed.
You've done it so many times now. It's almost like the artistry of breakfast has turned you into a professional. All right.
I developed the skills, and now it's art.
Right. So with that, everyone, thank you for listening to the In Good Time podcast. We hope that you were able to take something out of this. We hope that you have a great rest of your day.